Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's a little crowded in here, but if you like, you can all come up front. It's plenty of space. So my name is Wayne Nastri. I'm the Executive Officer of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. We're happy that we've got such a great turnout to talk about this AQMP funding work group. I'm sure we have a lot of people on the phone, so thanks for participating any way that you can. And I know that we're also doing a webcast, so we have people probably watching us from the comfort of their homes or office. But let's go ahead and begin by introducing everybody at the tables. So Lisa, let's start with you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Tanaka. I'm Acting Program Supervisor working on Federal Relations.
And Philip Crabb, Community Relations Manager. I'm the lead on state legislation.
Derek Alatorre, Deputy Executive Officer for Legislative, Public Affairs, and Media.
Matt Miyasato, the Deputy for Science and Technology Advancement.
Hi, I'm Barbara Baird. I'm Chief Deputy Counsel in the Legal Division.
Philip Fine, Deputy Executive Officer, Planning and Rules Division.
And Mike Kraus, Planning and Rules Manager.
Sarah Reese, I'm Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in Planning.
Megan Lorenz, Principal Deputy District Counsel in the Legal Office.
I'm Andy Henderson, an attorney in Los Angeles, and I'm here representing the Building Industry Association of Southern California.
Mary Jane, can you use the mic so people on the phone and internet can hear you?
Mary Jane Alasso, San Bernardino County.
Thank you.
Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance.
Press the button.
Right here. There you go.
Okay. Hi, my name is Marianne Kim. I'm with the Auto Club AAA.
Eli Lippman, Move LA.
Thomas Yelenich, PMSA.
Thanks, Thomas. So you're going to hear from our staff about a brief update on the format of today's meeting. We'll also provide an update regarding our efforts thus far and what we're going to continue to do, particularly with regards at the state and federal level about air quality funding. And we're also going to turn to all of you on this side of the room about what are some of the options, what are some of the things that we're doing, what are some of your perceptions on how we're doing it, and any additional ideas and thoughts you may have that we need to secure the funding to implement the AQMP by the deadlines that we're looking at, 2024 and 2031. So, and then finally, we're going to hope to identify and discuss new ideas on how we can best spread the message or get the word out, if you will, about the funding levels needed to achieve clean air in the South Coast region. And also joining us at the table is Denny Zane with Move LA. Great. So I look forward to a good, healthy discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Derek.
Thank you, Wayne. First, I want to thank everyone for coming today. This is very important for us as part of the AQMP. We need to get funding to make sure that this 2016 AQMP is successful. But more importantly, part of it was having a two-way conversation with stakeholders on ways that we can come up with the funding. So this is the third meeting that we've had with stakeholders to discuss it. And I believe later on this year, we're going to be giving a report to our board to update them on what we heard from the stakeholders. I want to remind everyone to make sure you sign up when you come in so that we make sure you get the information via email on the upcoming, well, it'll be the report at this point. But additionally, more importantly, if there's any other folks that you know of that want information from us on the AQMP funding, please make sure you put their name on that sign-in sheet. As you're all likely aware, the working group was formed to assist us, as I mentioned earlier, with developing effective and sustained funding for the AQMP. Later in the meeting, we'll be having breakout groups to facilitate the conversation, ideas that are being generated in response to the following questions. What are the best recommendations on how to inform local, state, and federal officials about the importance and the need of incentive program funding to enable South Coast to attain federal air quality standards while emphasizing the environmental and economic benefits of funding, of what the funding brings. When you get into breakout groups, please provide a recommended list of viable funding ideas and strategies for South Coast to use to secure this incentive funding for the 2016 AQMP. Also, please provide as many details as possible so when we write this report and we actually, they are viable ideas, that we have a more in-depth knowledge of what these ideas are and how we go about moving forward. And then the third question is, what are recommended joint actions that AQMD can take with various stakeholders through collaboration and partnerships to help us drive these efforts in securing the needed funding for the AQMP? I'm happy to answer any questions on this. If there's none, I'll turn it over to Philip Crabb, and Philip's going to give us a presentation on our activities at the state level relating to funding. Philip.
Thank you very much, Derek. Okay, so I'm going to give a quick kind of overview, a little bit of review from 2017 at the state level funding legislation, but also kind of our activities this year for 2018. So kind of a review, AB 109 and AB 134 were the budget trailer bills, and that basically allocated about $1.5 billion in greenhouse gas reduction fund money. $250 million of that was allocated for one-time Carl Moyer statewide funding, based on a 43% portion of our region's population compared to the state. AQMD is scheduled to receive $107.5 million in that funding to deal with our heavy-duty vehicles and other Carl Moyer qualified vehicles to reduce mobile source pollution. Also, not to be forgotten, in AB 134, there was $645 million in other types of funding, which is mostly done through either allocations or grant applications. Not all of this funding was available to the South Coast, but you can see a varied variety in terms of $180 million for hybrid and zero-emission truck and bus voucher. You had clean vehicle rebate program monies, $140 million for port improvements and equipment. We received $15 million of the $100 million for EFMP. For us, it's our Replace Your Ride program, and that's focused on disadvantaged communities, trying to increase the access of clean cars, clean vehicles to disadvantaged communities. And there was also $85 million for agricultural type emission reduction. Also, AB 1274 O'Donnell, that was an important bill that we did last year, but will not take effect until 2019. And that defers a smog check for vehicles by 2 years and takes the money that the consumer would have spent on that smog check and redirects it to the Carl Moyer program. And that will basically help to, reduce NOx emissions, diesel particulate matter emissions from heavy-duty vehicles. That should garner at least $30 million per year for the South Coast region. And that's important because that's a new, sustainable funding source that can go ahead towards supporting our AQMP and to reducing mobile source pollution, which is, of course, one of our key problems here in the region. Finally, there was also SB 132, and that provided a $50 million in seed money for zero and near zero emission warehouse programs to be administered by CARB. That required a 1-to-1 match. So basically would result in about $100 million total for projects, and that's in the process of being allocated by CARB or administered by CARB. So moving on to 2018, at this point, we're still dealing with the budget. The initial proposal from the governor came out in January. There'll be a May revise coming out with new numbers. One of the first things we had to do, and we're still having to do, is play a little bit of defense. We joined a varied coalition to oppose a proposed diversion by the governor of tire fees from the Carl Moyer program to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. The proposal would have backfilled that money through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, but of course that's money that's fought over every year. It's a lot more unstable than the tire fees that were just scheduled to be going to the Carl Moyer program every year. At issue is $26 million statewide, which would be about $11 million for the South Coast region. That still is in flux, but we have continued our efforts to try to make sure that that does not happen and that we maintain what we already have. In terms of cap and trade, because of the passage of not only extending the deadlines in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also extending the authorization for the cap and trade program, that has stabilized the cap and trade auction proceeds. Official estimates from the governor's office are more about $1.25 billion will be in the pot to be fought over this year for greenhouse gas reduction fund monies. Although the Legislative Analyst Office has estimated that actually that's an underestimate. There could be as much as $1.3 billion in 2018. And that's the portion that's available for discretionary funding, not including all the other money that goes towards things like the bullet train, sustainable housing, those kinds of things that are already allocated right off the top. So in the governor's budget, similar to last year in AB 134, this year the governor proposed allocating $250 million in the greenhouse gas reduction fund monies for AB 617 efforts. But this is not implementation of 617. Essentially, $250 million would be allocated by CARB to provide grants for early incentive actions to reduce both stationary and mobile source pollution, and particularly focusing on communities that are heavily impacted by air pollution. This proposal would provide funding to strategically reduce both the criteria and toxic emissions in the communities identified as part of the AB 617 process. So they're trying to take that money and target it. It's not coming directly to the districts, it's going through CARB this time. That's a proposal by the governor. It's part of the budget that's still to be debated, with the other houses, with the Senate and the Assembly. So that'll be part of a grand bargain for the budget, and that has to be done earlier in the year. So we still have time to work on that. Last year, in comparison, as I said, $250 million went straight to Carl Moyer. Program was allocated for that purpose and went to all the air districts for distribution, so the little difference in the way the money's being allocated this year. One other item that you've probably heard of was it's still in flux. It's a potential proposal, something that would seek authorization from the legislature to put a 1/4-cent sales tax increase proposal on the ballot here locally within the region for voter approval. It would not specifically create a ballot measure. That's important to understand. It's just an authorization, and it would only basically allow South Coast Action or voter-driven initiative process to put that proposal on the ballot. So that's just step one. There would have to be a step two. This type of effort is estimated to generate about $700 million a year annually. A public survey was conducted to gauge public reaction. It was also those results were presented to our board. This item is not yet approved, and further direction is still pending in terms of where we go from here on that. But that's obviously a big item, so it's a process that we're moving forward on.
So what was the outcome of the survey? SB1 looks like, I don't know if SB1's going to go down. So, the voters are mad. So how did your survey look for the sales tax?
Well,
there were a number of factors that were identified in the survey. I mean, overall, the survey results, I would say, were very positive. I think it was like 65% were favorable, but it varied by county. So you had the strongest support in LA County. You probably had the least support in Orange County, where I think it was 51 or 52% in that range. There were a whole host of issues that were identified. I think that people really overwhelmingly liked the idea of replacing school buses with cleaner electric type buses. And I want to say, I'm looking at staff, I think that was 85%? 89%? 89%. So the numbers overall, I would say, are very encouraging. It's important to recognize that that survey went out without any type of outreach or any type of education. So at least with the experts that we've spoken with, they're very encouraged by that. But that'll be, like we said, up to the board to determine how to proceed. Thanks.
So that survey is actually, the poll results are on our website if you're interested in getting it. It is on our website. No, Eli, you probably pulled it off our website. It's on our website. All the numbers are there. You could take a look at it. It's kind of, you have the print copy? It's, the numbers were interesting, very interesting.
Denny?
I looked at the survey on the website as well. Oh. I looked at the survey on the website as well, and I thought there were several things that were very interesting as well. It included questions, for example, about some regional infrastructure needs that are air quality related. Am I okay? Yeah, like that. Project. All right, not starting over, but when I looked at it, I was very encouraged by some findings and that asked questions about the respondents' attitudes toward things like goods movement modernization and Metrolink modernization and truck-only lanes and the like. And I would have, I think, expected that there might be less knowledge, if you will, among the public about those things. But it was evident that most people actually had heard of these things and were very, very favorable toward them. And that was an encouraging thing. It's an aware public.
That's the end of my presentation. If there's any other comments or questions, otherwise I will happily turn it over to, okay, sorry.
Just curious, what quantification there has been undertaken to understand the amount of capital that's needed to convert the fleet in time to meet these targets? That it seems to me that the fleet is huge. These are big numbers we're talking about, but are they really teeny numbers in comparison to the amount of capital we're talking about stranding and replacing?
So this was all done as part of the 2016 AQMP. I'm trying to remember which chapter, chapter 4. There was an estimate of the costs it would take to turn over the fleet to the extent needed to meet attainment. It's not the entire fleet. We need 45% reductions by 2023, 55% by 2031. So there were estimates made. Obviously, there's some uncertainties about the cost of technology as we go forward and the cost effectiveness going forward. But we made the best estimates we could at the time. And the hope is that as time goes on and these technologies mature and there's more mass production, that the costs will come down. But we're still hopeful that for the amount that we've presented, that which is about $1 billion a year, that we can get the change needed to meet the standards.
The $1 billion a year is what you hope to raise, or what you think the need is?
That's what we think the need is, so obviously that's what we'd hope to raise. And what you saw is that we're not all the way there, but we've made some progress. There's more and more funding being put towards these types of programs at the state level, and as you'll see, a little bit more at the federal level. But again,
I would just add that $1 billion a year is based on a certain funding level for incentives. And I know that Matt and his team have been looking at that, and it's very well that it could be more than that. So that's something that I think we need to be aware of. So we're looking at least $1 million a year that we're trying to raise.
That the need could be more than that?
Yes.
And then the other thing is, I think I heard yesterday that in the United States, the Ford Motor Company is going to start building only 2 small cars and focus more on vans and pickup trucks and bigger cars. I guess probably in light of the change in the administration. So it seems to me if the federal government's going that way and the auto companies are following, that this agency probably needs to reconsider its sort of ability to reach these federal goals that are going to become increasingly impossible, and many think are already impossible to meet on the timelines given.
I mean, that's one example of one company making some business decisions, but I think you can't take that in isolation. If you look at the offerings that are coming out from all the car companies in terms of zero-emission vehicles and even the plug-in hybrid vehicles and even the popularity of fuel cell vehicles, I think you have to look at the whole picture. And when we're talking about where this funding needs to be applied, it's not so much in that light-duty sector. It is mostly in the heavy-duty sector, so not the trucks, trains, some of the heavier equipment. So whatever happens on the light-duty sector is not even part of our calculation because it's a relatively small part of our inventory in terms of NOx reduction needs.
And I think just from a policy perspective, our board certainly has the ability to reconsider its position, but just from the broad historical perspective, California has always led the way and the federal government has always followed. So from the perspective of whether or not the federal government is doing something now, I don't think that's really going to be a determinative factor for how California or how this district proceeds. The district has made clear that it doesn't intend to do any backsliding. The district is going to continue to move forward, and as Dr. Fine said, our focus is on the heavy-duty sector. When you've got Elon Musk, you've got BYD, you've got all these groups, you've got China driving the cleaner markets. I would say we're very much in agreement with ARB with regards to their goals for zero-emission vehicles. So.
I just want to make a quick comment. I completely agree with what Philip just said about the strides and the accomplishments that have been made on the light-duty side, and that's not to say that there still needs to be a lot more done to reduce emissions. And I think we're a partner, the Auto Club and the AAA are a partner in trying to reduce those passenger vehicle emissions and also reduce the VMT and overall. But I think where we want to be to work with this group is in that nexus between the passenger vehicle drivers, the light duty drivers, and the motorists and the people who are paying into the system to help reduce the emissions from the heavy duty sector, and that's the compromise that we need to figure out. So.
Thanks. Nancy Pfeffer with the Gateway Cities COG. I just had a follow-up question. I was listening on the phone before I came in, and the speaker was talking about a state program among several where it was, I think, 25 million statewide, and they said 11, was it you? Said, and that's 11 million for South Coast. Just kind of right off the bat, you knew that. So I'm just curious which state programs sort of have, like, is there a baked-in percentage that comes to Southern California or comes to South Coast AQMD versus maybe other programs where we have to fight for the appropriate share? I just don't know what's sort of written in and what is up for grabs or up for discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of these, it varies. Sometimes we definitely do have to fight. Greenhouse gas reduction fund monies, obviously, it's a free-for-all in a sense. But for Carl Moyer, right now it's based on population for what we receive. So it's 43% is basically of the total pot. That's why I got that number from. So.
Yeah, but Philip, I would just add that everything is always now a fight. So
Right.
even though that we have Moyer and Prop 1B percentages that are pre-prescribed, with all the GGRF money, it's just always a cat fight now. Yeah. Derek has his work cut out for him.
I'll do.
Good afternoon again. My name is Lisa Tanaka O'Malley, and I'm going to present some information on our federal legislative actions and administrative actions. So I just wanted to show you briefly how federal appropriations, while they're not as high as some of our state appropriations, have indeed been growing. For the Diesel Emissions Reductions Act grants, those are the heavy-duty diesel grants. The funding went up to 75 million, which was a significant jump from the previous year of 60. Targeted airshared grants, which are for non-attainment areas, went up to 40 million, and Section 103, 105 is more directed for the monitoring network, but that has been remaining constant. Right now, we're in the midst of the fiscal year FY19 appropriations process. South Coast AQMD has been working with our California delegation and key members of Congress and the committee staff to support these programs. Again, DARA, targeted airshared grants, and the Section 103, 105. Yesterday, if you tuned in, the House Energy and Commerce Committee and the House Subcommittee on Appropriations for the Environment held hearings with EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. So that was sort of the beginning of the budget hearings on FY19 appropriations. The Senate Appropriations Subcommittee is expected to have their hearing in May, probably mid-May. If you miss them, you can go online and watch them. And other actions going on, the infrastructure bill, which we were originally hopeful would have some opportunities for air quality related funding, seems to have slowed significantly. If there is movement on an infrastructure bill, they're expecting smaller bills potentially, but Congress has been pretty busy with other issues. So not directly funding related, but just to kind of give you a sense of the environment in DC right now. It's been very crazy. Some of the administrative issues that are going on is the proposed repeal of the emissions requirements for glider vehicles. So that would be allowing these companies to create trucks sort of like Frankenstein. So they take an older engine, usually 2002 engine, and put it in a new body. And that could result in a significant increase in emissions from these heavy-duty diesel vehicles. So that's one thing that we're really working on and keeping in touch with. In fact, our executive officer went and testified before the US EPA in December. And we've been briefing our delegation members who've taken a strong interest in this. And there was report language in the FY18 appropriations bill to report back to Congress on this issue by US EPA, but that decision hasn't been made yet. Other current administration issues is the reconsideration of the CAFE standards or the corporate average fuel standards. Again, this is light duty, not heavy duty vehicles, but there's concern that if this moves forward, it could have an impact on the California waiver and then potentially long legal battles, and if it could set a precedent for rollback of other regulations that could affect the heavy duty sector, or perhaps even stymie or slow innovation within the vehicle sector. So that's something we're watching. So that both relates to the light duty standards and their California waiver. And then other actions, the president, it wasn't a very large announcement, but he did put out an announcement that he would be looking at to the EPA to, he phrased it as efficiencies, implement greater efficiencies within the US EPA. And it was referenced a lot yesterday in the hearings, and that would be like more timely approvals of state implementation plans, more timely approvals of permitting, and other issues. But it's just something to keep an eye on because there hasn't been a lot of definition about what this exactly means. Another area that was mentioned a lot yesterday in the hearings was a proposed rule which would require that the all data for studies related to air quality regulations would need to be made publicly accessible in order to utilize that study in a rulemaking process, and that's also of interest to us. So just to let you know, other things that South Coast AQMD has been involved in, we co-hosted with the Twin Ports, with LA and Long Beach, a visit by US EPA Assistant Administrator Bill Wareham. And it was a really good discussion, day-long tours of the port complexes and coming here to South Coast to tour our laboratory. And we had a great display of different types of heavy duty and medium duty vehicles for the assistant administrator and his staff from the Office of Air and Radiation. And we'll be continuing that dialogue with the US EPA. And then lastly, right now, we're currently working on putting together a trip to DC to reinforce our message, primarily on appropriations and other key issues. And with that, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Now, what we'll do, we talked about going into a breakout session, but being that I don't think it's necessary, why don't we just handle the breakout session as a whole and not breakout? And so at this time, what I'd like to do is just open it up to a discussion on suggestions, ideas of funding. I know that we had a robust discussion at the last meeting in November on this, and if we can come up with some other ideas or maybe expand on some of the ideas that were brought forth to us back then. So, sure, Marion.
I'm sorry, I wasn't here last November. Can you briefly recap some of the ideas that
Okay, sure.
occurred?
Do you have that? No. Why don't we do this? I'll have Philip go and get it, and we'll come down. We'll okay, but I'll have him bring it down anyways. Yeah. Denny, you want to open it up? Because I know you have plenty of ideas.
Especially interested in this discussion about a ballot measure. When I do the numbers here from the state, it sort of looks like somewhere between 200 and 400 million dollars year over year is developing to a reasonable expectation. And that means the quarter-cent sales tax, $700 million, pretty close to reaches the $1 billion a year. And I think that's a very beckoning outcome. There may be more that comes from the state, but of course we've heard that the budget may actually rise for the needs. So one should anticipate that 700 million, it may need additional state support to reach where we reach. I'm also interested in, it seems to me that in the context of a NOx-oriented emissions reduction program, that having additional resources, for example, from the greenhouse gas reduction pool that the state has could, because that might emphasize more light duty, but that has NOx implications as well. So it may not be the top priority, but it's helpful. So I think that one, in looking at such a measure, maybe wants to poll on such questions like that as well, to see what kind of attitude voters have. And I also, I think the polling that I saw on the website was very encouraging. That you may need to ponder having some supplemental investments that attract business community and the labor community as well, that, if you will, they're air quality related, and that have an ability to broaden the base both among the voters, but also among the advocate and the constituency world out there, some kind of grand bargain thing. I know that was what we were looking at when we were trying to, working with Metro on Measure R and Measure M, is to find out where was the best combination of advocacy resources from constituencies and voter response that was likely to get to the winner's circle, and it worked pretty well in that case. I'm encouraged when I look back at the history of some of the other counties in the district that they too have had success at the ballot with transportation measures. In fact, San Bernardino County, I think, approved the measure by 80% not that long ago, and that would be that's a very encouraging. I mean, LA County on Measure R got, what, 67.3. If someone had, if they'd have gotten an 80%, they probably put in a ballot measure on every election.
But-
You know, it's, that's, so I think there's some real signs of potential for success there. And my guess is that the job and economic development and congestion relief elements of an infrastructure package that was a clean air related would also be very, very encouraging to both constituencies and voters. There's a winning package there somewhere.
Yeah, I think just from the agency perspective, we have to take small steps first. We presented the poll to the board. Our next step is to seek the board approval to go ahead and go to the next step, which would be seek
Yeah.
legislation.
And some of those areas are outside of your general authority. The legislature would have to, I think, figure out what it wanted to do.
Right. Yep. But, you know, I'm sorry, that's not to say that. That's not, I don't know what the board's going to do. We don't know what the board's going to do.
Right.
But I would imagine that if they do move in that direction, or if they don't move in that direction, you know, that's ultimately going to be their call on what we do.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's where we're at.
I was elected something once too, and
Yeah.
everything defers to the electeds,
Yeah. Or the bosses.
the board.
Go ahead, Marianne.
A couple of comments. One, I thought I heard you say before about the ballot measure that you would have to, you were going to circulate it for signature to get on the ballot versus trying to get legislative authority to just go on the ballot? Or?
No, so first we have to get legislative authority
Uh-huh.
to put a ballot on our, a measure on the ballot. And then once we do that, then either the board agrees to put the initiative on the ballot, or a citizens group can get the signatures to put it on the ballot.
Okay. And the other comment I want to make was, I think that people are less familiar with a sales tax for air quality, and so there will be a lot of education in the front end for something like that, versus for San Bernardino with that 80%, that was a renewal of an existing sales tax, so there was a lot of familiarity and comfort and all that there, but a sales tax for air quality, that's something that people are going to have to wrap their heads around, so it's going to require, you know, Denny's magic and everything.
Marianne, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that we got out of the poll was that between 2001, when we did the last poll, and now the familiarity with the agency did not rise significantly. But it also showed, as we mentioned, or someone else mentioned, there's some really good positive things in that. Wayne mentioned that, you know, when it comes to replacing buses, that was, you know, 89% of the people that were part of the poll were receptive to that. They want that to happen. And if you just take a look at the results, you're going to see even, you know, heavy duty trucks, medium duty trucks, they want those off. Trains, all those big polluters that are causing our mobile source problem, they got very significant, very high, over 70%, and in most cases over 80%, you know, support to, you know, change them out.
I just I wanted to make another comment, and then I'll back off for a second. One of your first questions was about the recommendations on how to inform local, state, and federal officials about the importance and need for incentive programs and funding. I would just add maybe other stakeholders as well, because I don't think you have full buy-in from the general public and other stakeholders for and people don't fully understand the need for these incentive programs, and I admit that sometimes the people I work with, my own organization, could be included in that group. So I think that maybe you can add those extra people in there in addition to the local officials. Okay.
Marianne, is there a way that we could work with the Auto Club on maybe drafting an article or something that helps explain that? I mean, I'm a AAA member and I get the monthly, I think it's monthly magazine. Yeah, Westways.
It's funny. I think I think I am drafting an article for something having to do with what is that? The Coalition for Clean Air is doing something like the Clean Air Day or something like that together, and we're talking about that. So maybe we can incorporate a little bit more of what from the AQMD's perspective on that article too. For
that would be great. I mean, we could you know, certainly provide some language and then have you review it. And
okay,
great. Thanks.
Any other ideas? Yes, Paul. Just tap your button in the front, on the bottom, on the base, there you go.
Oh, there we go. I must apologize for not being here earlier, but I represent California Refuse Recycle Group and also CRC. And also I'm the Director of Regulatory Affairs for the Inland Empire Disposal Association.
Bring your mic closer, Paul. So.
All right. I'm wrestling with paper here. As I said, I must apologize for not jumping in earlier, but it seems to me that I haven't heard enough dialogue between the industry, the refuse, recycling, composting industry, in regard to some of the initiatives, both at the district as well as CARB, in terms of the captive fleet issue, the trash truck issue, and the drayage truck issue. We're deeply involved with the conversion of the fleets. We're supporting the natural gas, RNG, CNG pathway. We find that that's the most beneficial at this time, as pointed out by Mary at the last ARB meeting. And we would like to begin a dialogue because there are many things that we need to do. And I think with the new low NOx standard, the 0.02 gram per braking horsepower engine that's available for the fleets, both the 8.9 liter and the 12 liter, there's some real opportunities to move ahead and possibly structure things that we can take advantage of early implementation, which would benefit certainly the district as well as the overall state implementation plan. So I would like to meet with you folks after the meeting and talk this over a little bit more. I'm very much interested in seeing how you're going to implement the item that was heard at ARB on March 22nd, and that had to do with the South Coast Air Quality Management District on-road heavy-duty vehicle incentive measures that you are co-sponsoring with CARB. And this is something that's vitally interesting to us, and we'd like to talk to you and know more.
Absolutely. I think the gentleman to your right maybe will help you with that.
Okay. Game on.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. And then Rick, you had a question?
Hi, I'm Rick Tebay with LA County. And while this meeting was going on, I saw a breaking news story from the LA Times. The EPA has a plan that would freeze fuel economy targets at levels required for vehicles sold in 2020 and leave targets in place through 2026, according to federal officials who have reviewed the plan. So,
Rick, if you don't mind bringing the mic closer to you.
Sure. A couple things, Denny. I think we passed a lot of sales taxes, and I know in LA County we are at 9.5% right now, and sales taxes are regressive. Fully more than half of all the disadvantaged communities statewide are within LA County. And when you take the South Coast region, you're looking at a significantly larger percentage of disadvantaged communities. A lot of the goods that come into the port don't just get sold in Southern California. And I would really encourage that we look at other sources. And just as an example, if there were a container fee, so that it was, regardless of whether it was a high-end TV or some fake cosmetics, there would be some kind of a container fee. Half of the, 40%? More than 40% of the goods that come into this country come through the Twin Ports, and they get distributed throughout the nation. And we have the burden because of the transportation, moving the goods from the ports. I would also consider something like a refinery fee. I know that'll be really popular in some circles, but if there was a fee on every barrel of oil refined, that is a significant. So I guess my point is this: look at the sources of the emissions, and then find a way to leverage those and spread those across the greatest population possible, rather than against a subset that that bears the burden.
Thank you, Rick. I know that Port of Long Beach, I spoke to them this morning. They were going to be listening in on the webcast. I'm sure their ears got turned on when you said that. That was an item that was discussed, I want to say, a year or so ago about a container fee. We just had some initial thoughts. It was brought up during the AQMP briefing to the board, and of course, the ports are not, they don't like that idea, but I agree with you that, you know, the goods movement is a large reason why we have the problems that we have with the trucks going through our district, the trains, and the ships coming into our ports. And so appreciate that. Yeah, Thomas.
Thanks. First, I got to challenge one of the things you just said about the ports being responsible for a large portion of the problem. You know, when you look at port-related truck trips within the region, they're 10% or less of regional trips. The vast majority of heavy-duty truck trips in this region are domestic moves. That's because we have a large and vibrant economy. So pinning everything on the ports is just wrong.
That's not what I meant to say. I just meant the goods movement. I meant to say the goods movement. I apologize.
I'm sure a lot of people do think that. It's a common misperception, and I think it needs to be corrected. And when we talk about things like a container fee, I think we first need to look at what the ports have accomplished in terms of emission reductions, how they right now have hands down the most aggressive plan for reducing emissions in terms of what they have already achieved and what they plan to achieve over the next few years. So, at least in my view, a container fee is potentially misguided. A lot of the discussion about a container fee has been generating more money than would be even targeted at port sources. So looking at the ports as a revenue source for emission sources outside the ports, and obviously I would think that's a mistake. So, the ports need to do their part. We are doing our part, and we've been incredibly successful, particularly on things like cargo handling equipment and heavy-duty trucks.
Thomas, would you also say that's true, not just at the state level, but perhaps at the national level? I mean, would you be opposed to a national container fee program? I mean, because in my discussion with the ports, they would be, at least what I thought I heard, was that they were supportive of a national effort.
When I talked to the ports after the previous comment, they said their sense of a fee, and I wish they were here, was that that would be the least harmful if you did it at a national level, not that they were supportive. So I would agree with that sentiment. A national fee would certainly level the playing field.
Right.
But, what is that fee going to be used for, and how, and, in this case, probably a tax, and are we going to be taxing the maritime sector simply to drive benefits in other sectors? And that would be something that's deeply concerning.
Well, I think there's no doubt about the impacts of ocean-going vessels, right? And if we were able to address the ocean-going vessels aspect, I guess my point is there are different means that we can look to raise funds. And we certainly understand the concern about a very localized initiative like just the LA Long Beach Port Complex versus a statewide, which puts us at a disadvantage from the West Coast, perhaps. But the national container fee obviously has, like you're saying, an equalizing effect amongst all ports. And I think there is, maybe not support is the right word, but maybe more of an acceptance of that type of an approach would be something to consider. Because, right, we're still trying to do that all of the above approach. And so part of what we're trying to do is identify what is all of the above, right? So maybe it is a sales tax, maybe it is a container fee, maybe it is a registration fee, nobody said it, but I think, Marianne's probably concerned that maybe it's a mileage fee, vehicle mileage tax or something along those lines. What are all of those components? And perhaps there's a percentage or a allocation that could be done that might be acceptable. We don't know, but we're trying to sort of come up with the idea of what are all of those possibilities. We've come up with some, and those are identified and referenced within the AQMP. But I think the challenge before us today is, are there other things that we've thought of or other things that we've seen that are successful, whether it be here in the United States or internationally?
Yeah, just reminding the group, I agree with Wayne, if the container fee is to be addressed, don't make us less competitive with the other ports, throughout the United States. That's one. Two, let's keep an eye on the working poor. They're not going to be able to afford the technologies. They're going to be paying that gas tax at the pump, plus what was already passed through SB1 if it's not repealed. So, you have a lot of poor people, I have a lot of poor people, and let's just, be really careful that we don't penalize them for trying to get to work and make a living.
Nancy?
Thanks, Nancy with Gateway Cities. Just wanted to mention that a couple of months ago, our board passed a resolution of opposition to SB1 repeal, and I was just curious whether your board had considered the issue at all.
No, that's not our fight. Go ahead.
I just want to say on behalf of the building industry generally, I think the industry very much favors fleet and fuel change over time, gradually done, and as to some of the alternatives that impose really heavily on the building industry, in particular, highly prescriptive top-down land use regulations and even this whole Senate Bill 743 type focus on vehicle miles traveled. Land use tends to unfold very organically. It's best controlled by local government without a lot of top-down prescription. And so we fear that kind of regulatory regime is always looming. And if the alternative is to change the fleets and fuels over time, then we would much prefer that. And I think when you talk about a trade-off or grand bargain, it seems to me that's something that should be thought of, is can we get everyone behind fleet and fuel change over time and try to stay away from some of these more almost impossible prescriptions that have tremendous ramifications for the ability to build reasonably priced housing. And you just can't force it all into the urban center and expect it to be affordable. And that's why we've got so much homelessness in the urban areas, is probably because we aren't building. And the other thing about that is the home building industry is a very small tax base. Even after the recovery in recent years, we're only adding 0.5% annually to the housing stock in the state of California. And it got down to as low in 2009 to 0.25%. So that's a very small level of activity on which to impose a lot of big lift for the kind of changes that you need to see. Fleet, a very accelerated fleet change of heavy trucks. The home building industry is just too small a level of activity to ask for much along those lines. And if you ask for too much from the home building industry, you just don't get the kind of home building we need, and we're already far below what we need to meet a growing population. So I think when you look at that, we would urge that there be as broad a possible source of funding for the monies needed to do this kind of fleet and fuel change over time. And again, that's in contrast to thinking that somehow land use development and redevelopment is a particularly ripe area to tax to achieve these goals.
Adrian, I'm sorry, Denny. I was just going to say, Adrian, I know you came in a little late, but why don't you come up to the table and join us, because I'm sure you have some thoughts as well. Go ahead, Denny.
Adrian never has much to say. Come on. So I think this discussion is a particularly healthy direction. The idea that there might be revenue sources from several different sources in some fashion fairly distributed among both burdens and benefits, I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, we saw when the rumor of the air districts polling about a quarter-cent sales tax came out, we got a little blowback from the LA Times, although their editorial wasn't in the vein "don't do this," but rather "do it fair," and their perception was that people would see a sales tax as unfair if the beneficiaries were principally truck operators and you know, people in the goods movement industry. So I think the goods movement industry needs to think itself about what sort of sources of revenue it might want to bring to the table for some such grand bargain. I think that would be a very healthy direction to proceed on. As to the sales tax, Rick, I had exactly the same attitude early before Measure R and was looking at, back then, trying to advance the idea of a vehicle fee to fund what became Measure R. And there were two things that I learned back then. One, from a study that LA Economic Development Corporation did, was that while sales taxes may be regressive,
Bring it closer, the mic closer.
Sales taxes may be regressive if they're simple sales taxes on all items. In California, while they didn't entirely exempt low-income people from them, they exempted most of the things that low-income people purchase. And that when you look at the actual distribution in Los Angeles County, LA EDC did that, it turned out that 2/3 of the sales tax, as accounted for with the you know, looking at the receipts themselves, were from business-to-business transactions and from tourism. And that voter/resident sales taxes were about 1/3 of the actual revenue. So if you had a package, for example, where hypothetically half the revenue was coming from sales tax and another half from, I don't know, some fees related to the industry, the actual share of taxes paid by residents would be about 1/6 of the total. And I think that's an important aspect of this discussion to keep in mind. The other was when we were doing polling prior to Measure R, the only tax then that got close to 2/3 was the sales tax. Now, we weren't then looking at the possibility of a package of revenue streams. My guess is that voters would be more supportive of a measure if it included a sales tax, but also included revenue from the goods movement sector, for example, as well, that's a package that would be appealing to voters and improve the polling results that we've heard. So I think we'll have to kind of keep a little bit of flexibility about what the package might look like, and maybe also be willing to look a second time at some of our presumed conclusions about different forms of sales tax of revenues and how they burden or not different populations and different groups. But fairness is clearly important. Voters will vote for something much more likely if they see it as fair.
Real quick, I have to step away. My daughter's going to prom tonight, and I got to do my daddy duty, take pictures. But I'm going to turn it over to Philip. He's going to be doing the handle the Q&A, and sorry I have to leave early. All right, thanks.
And you were saying something?
Question for Denny. In your surveys on voter responsiveness to different forms of taxing or self-imposed taxing, did you say that the sales tax was, people were much more receptive to the sales tax versus like a vehicle tax? Or because what I've seen from my observation and on these ballot measures is that even though motorists constitute a very large portion of the population, and so you have a huge overlap. When they feel they're singled out for vehicle taxes, registration fees, as such, even on the ballot, they're much less responsive than a sales tax. And I was wondering what your surveys have found.
The surveys that I have seen, multiple surveys, showed that voters were more receptive and willing to support sales taxes than they were automobile fees. Now, the sort of thing we're looking at here includes things like truck fees and industry-related fees, I think, or taxes as well, that wouldn't fall on the voter in the same way that a car fee. But the question really should be, we should be thinking about what's package of revenue sources. Maybe there are 3 or 4 together, which, if packaged correctly, are both fairer and more politically acceptable, and perhaps more robust in the terms of the revenue they generate.
I think I need to ask for a little caution on the idea of multiple revenue streams, at least is the way I'm hearing it. You know, the reason we're talking about finding funding for incentive programs is because much of industry and the folks I represent, port industry, are in the process of fleet replacement now, replacing their fleet with the state-mandated cleanest equipment available. And if you're going to ask them to basically dispose of new equipment to move into the next generation, you know, they're going to need an incentive to do that. If, on the other hand, you're going to tax that group to fund the replacement of that equipment, that is not an incentive. That is a poorly designed and inefficient in-use rule, and we should move in that direction. So, you know, I think the goal, if we're looking for incentive funding to move the fleet, whichever fleet may be in the goods movement or broader, to cleaner equipment, and that equipment is the result of state mandates today and still has a long, useful life, the revenue streams that are going to support that incentive need to be broad-based and not targeted on the industry. Otherwise, it's not incentive. It's just really poorly designed regulation.
Okay, Paul?
Keep in mind that with the refuse recycling and composting industry, you know, we have the same problems. The structure, any kind of revenue gathering ideas or considerations have to keep in mind that we are captive fleets, we are changing right now, and we have millions and millions of dollars of investments in facilities to support local jurisdictions and so forth with diversion facilities, compost, and so on. We take on the burden readily, and we work with your partners at the state level, you know, in perfecting enterprise to support the state's efforts. However, underlying that, the way we fund the operations with generally is through contract services with local jurisdictions. Any type of unique revenue gathering impacts the ratepayers because it becomes a pass-through to the ratepayer. And particularly as noted by others, it becomes critical that we don't produce an excessive burden on low and moderate income and disadvantaged communities. I'm working on one project right now in one of the communities that has been targeted by EnviroScreen 3. And if we were to implement the changeover in the fleets plus the needed facilities to support that community, the rates to the disadvantaged community would run well in excess of $100 a month for trash service. So keep in mind that, you know, we have a very delicate balance that we have to continually adjust to make things work. And so a sector-specific revenue generation methodology is completely undesirable as far as the industry is concerned.
I don't think I've spoken about targeting one industry, but rather a mix of revenue sources that properly and fairly distribute burdens among beneficiaries. I would oppose a measure that was just a tax on the industry as an unfair and frankly unlikely to succeed. But you know, industry's got skin in the game. They should share the cost as well.
I don't think we object to sharing the cost, but like I said, it's a delicate balance, and we need to find that point for all of us so that it's, as you say, equitable and fair for all.
One thought I had around, there was some reference to fees on industry is, I know I kind of lost this debate at the Air District, but the Section 185 Clean Air Act approach of fee or emission reductions, I think, is a equitable approach to consider for some sectors, because I think you're in a better situation if the industry has an opportunity to turn off the fee or not have to pay the fee. So for example, in the freight context, if you have a terminal that's using zero emissions equipment, the trucks for zero emissions, it's not clear to me they should pay the same fee as someone who's operating diesels and things like that. I think it's a concept that's an old one, but something to consider, because people, I think, should have the opportunity to turn off any fee by doing the conduct we want, which is not emitting.
I'd just like to weigh in on that, because we had this fight, what was it, in 2012, I guess that was, when you all were sued. Section 185 doesn't mean, it means that the region is out of attainment, not that businesses are out of compliance. And I know that when we went back to Washington with the former executive officer, I brought several people as examples of small businesses. One would have their fees go from around $5,000 or $6,000 a year over to 60-some thousand. We brought that up at one of the governing board retreats in Palm Desert. There was another one that had that would have gone up over $100,000 for those Section 185 fees. So businesses have been regulated by this agency for 42 years. Some of them have been regulated into oblivion, and we're still out of attainment. And it's not stationary sources. We've gone from tons per year, tons per day, down to minuscule amounts, nanograms of emissions. And there's very little left to give on the stationary source side. You can't regulate us or to get to attainment. So for Adrian to suggest going on, relying on Section 185 fees, I think is outrageous.
Can I just
But I
clarify?
do think that-
Can I just clarify my point? I was saying, I understand I lost this debate, and the other thing is, I am a little frustrated as we're going through reclaim that a lot of this equipment hasn't been updated. But that's beside the point. The companies were complying with the reclaim laws. I was just saying, not necessarily on stationary sources. I was just saying, as a concept, if you are going to regulate an industry, whatever it is, give the industry the option to comply, to take off the fee, because you could be put in a situation where you're charging a fee on an industry, and you may have a company that has nothing else they can do, yet they're getting the fee. And I think that was the point I was trying to make, is if there is any fee, tax, how do you do it in a way that allows whomever needs to comply to get an out by doing the conduct you want, which is cleaner equipment or whatnot. And that was just how Section 185 was structured. I wasn't making a point about stationary sources or mobile sources or anything, just more broader point about a strategy.
Okay, and just wanted to say it's 2:15, so we're starting to run out of time a little bit. This is a good discussion. Also want to talk about how we can collaborate together. We have a lot of different interests coming up, and it's good to get everyone in the room. So I'll go to Eli first, and then we can go on to others.
Yeah, I just wanted to build a little bit on Adrian's point, because I think there are other things for us to consider, like if we include goods movement and infrastructure development within this, we could look at other incentives that aren't necessarily financial, such as a clean truck lane, right? Which would give the incentive for the industry to say, wow, we could save money and time by having a clean truck lane, a clean truck only lane. That would mean you could do 2 trips instead of just 1 trip from the port. So there's other opportunities for infrastructure and development. The other thing that, on a completely different note, that I wanted to encourage the district to pursue is, and I think the board brought this up at the last meeting, was the idea that people's understanding of the AQMD is at a lower level, particularly compared to the Bay Area. And they sort of asked what I think they asked at the meeting what the marketing budget was. And I think the plan was to get back to them on that. But I would encourage the district to think about ways in this period, as we're looking at this, to educate the public. I think it was said earlier about what you do and the importance of clean air. I know in the Bay Area they do Spare the Air, but what I'd really love to see, and I think would be really cool, I think this is what you guys need. Wayne, you need to do a jingle. You need to get all these lovely folks together. It'll be like We Are the World. You'll come together. Somebody probably plays the guitar.
Have you heard them sing? Trust me.
Wrong
We
group?
don't want to go there.
Okay, but you need something catchy, right? So the point being, I know it's a joke, but the point being, you need something catchy. You need something, and I know you guys do a ton of educational opportunities and going out and talking to the public, but I think there's a real opportunity to do more of a, as we say in the business, an air campaign, where you're out on the radio and you're out on TV and you're talking to, to folks on the radio about some of your programs, not just, when people get really angry that you're taking away their ability to have fire pits. A more positive campaign that educates the public in general about the work that you're doing.
Well, there's no doubt that we need to leverage the existing relationships. So, for instance, Paul, you were talking about your members. I know I get trash service and I get a monthly little newsletter in my bill. And, in the same way that we'd love to work with Marianne and AAA, we'd love to have maybe an article placed in something that you put out so that people understand that, you have cleaned up your fleets, but there's still more opportunity. And I think it's important that we sort of provide the material for the intended audience, right? So that people understand what are those benefits that are associated with that. Yeah. And I think we're right now in discussions with some of the major auto and truck manufacturers in terms of how can we work together more in terms of a communication outreach that's touting the benefits of the cleaner technology, both from a economic aspect as well as from a health perspective. And so part of this really has to focus on getting the communities to understand that there are those clean air benefits, that this is something that we want people to buy into. But it's not just looking at it at that specific community level, right? It's looking at all opportunities, whether we do it from a national level or we do it from a local level. Again, it's sort of, I want to make sure that we're considering all of those options. And so that's part of the reasons why we're working so hard in Sacramento, fighting for every scrap that we can get so that we can have the incentive funding to accelerate the deployment of technologies. But a lot of people don't even know about what those technologies are and what those benefits are. And I think to the extent that we can be more efficient in terms of goods moves so that perhaps we have less vehicles on the truck and they're cleaner, to the extent that we can have other programs in place, those are the kind of things that we really want to look to you. Bill, your small business group, I think that it would be probably surprising, perhaps, for them to sort of see an article about all the good things that they've done and how the district is trying to move forward in a broader perspective. And ask them, what are some of their ideas in terms of how can we actually advance this so that we as a community, a large community,
Yeah,
all
no, I was
benefit.
going to mention to Mary Ann that, I'm a 50-year member of the AAA, and so I hope that they accept op-eds pieces. But in all seriousness, if you're looking for money, for incentive money, you know, what you need to do is not write it, and I don't mean speak pejoratively of Westways, but you need to present a united front to Sacramento or to Washington, D.C., whatever way you're going, not this agency alone. And it's one that I'm convinced, I've seen this work in the past, where you have buy-in from all stakeholders, from businesses large and small, and from the community activist groups, that this is our collective feeling or objective, that we realize that we've done so much here, and there's more to do. And united, these are our, this is our position, and these are our recommendations to you as lawmakers. And do that not one-on-one, but that you've got enough of us behind you, or not behind you, but with you.
Can I comment on Wayne's comment? We not only need to deal with the mobile fleets, but certainly stationary sources as well, because certainly you participated with our membership in terms of the natural gas facilities and so on, and we appreciate that very much, because we're now at that point where we're an industry that can provide renewable natural gas to feed into the distribution system of Southern California gas. So that's a big achievement for the district. When we convert our equipment, like a 1,000 horsepower grinder for green waste and so forth, it's a substantial investment for us to do that, and the mining and construction industry has the same problems. It costs a lot of money to bring power into a facility. In fact, a lot of times we have to build a substation just to supply that change of equipment. So I just want to point out, it's not only the mobile sources, but also the stationary sources. It's a very costly venture for us.
Nancy, I know you've been patiently waiting, so please go ahead.
Thanks. This is Nancy with Gateway Cities. I actually wanted to come back to my earlier question about SB1, and I want to respectfully disagree with Derek, who isn't here any longer, but if he were still here, I would say this anyway. I think that this really is your fight also. I think that a lot of the investments that are coming under SB1, some of the funding that's just been announced, this funds transit projects. It funds projects that have definite air quality benefits, and building on what Eli said, he talked about a truck lane. That's infrastructure. The only way you build that is with that kind of investment. So I think that you really do have some common cause. You need to be reaching out with the other agencies you're all in this together, as has been said. I think it's also extremely important that we preserve the funding sources we have. We are trying to, get more and do big things, but if we lose what we already have, then we're just even deeper in the hole. So that also relates to Eli's point about education and outreach, and making sure that the public understands the benefits of the investments that have been made, and that goes for the infrastructure and the air quality investments we've already done. So I'd advocate for that.
So Nancy, have you spoken to Rongsheng on this issue, Rongsheng? From the SCAG perspective, has SCAG had a position on the SB1 recall?
Oh, yeah.
Certainly, this is Rongsheng of SCAG. Yeah, SCAG certainly strongly supported SB1.
Yeah.
We think the repeal will really have a detrimental impact, as we all experienced. A lot of roadways are really broken. A lot of funding is going to that effort.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you guys had a chance to talk about it to some of our members that are part of SCAG and part of the COG. Nancy, have you talked to Mayor Mitchell about that?
Not directly, but
Okay.
Yes, and she's actually going to come to our board next month to make a presentation, so we can even make sure that she talks about that. We meet with Hassan quarterly at SCAG and talk about those kinds of advocacy issues, and happy to facilitate any sort of a regional expression of support. I think it's very important for us to be out there and saying it publicly.
Yeah, I think Derek didn't necessarily mean that's not our fight. I think what Derek meant is he's involved on about 10,000 other things, and those maybe have priority for him right now. But I think that you're right, to the extent that we have greater coordination and communication amongst all of the sister agencies, there can be, you know, a stronger voice, as Bill's saying. The more that we are side by side and walking step by step, I think that it sends a powerful message.
Whatever I can do to help facilitate.
Okay.
And I would just add on to that point that I think a lot of the agencies, I don't know if SCAG actually took a position to oppose the repeal efforts, and I know Metro did, but I think a lot of transportation agencies, several of the other transportation agencies have not. So like OCTA, RCTC, I don't think they've are opposing the repeal efforts, but that doesn't mean they're not working behind the scenes to try to preserve SB1. And so even if your board doesn't take a position, I think not to put words into your mouth, but I think Nancy's point is that AQMD could still be out there working on this issue.
Well, we're certainly in Sacramento enough that if we're asked, we can certainly let it be known.
Yeah, and
But again, we need to make sure our ledge committee is okay. That's why we have Barbara.
yeah, actually,
Also,
sorry,
just we are allowed to take positions on, for example, the proposal to repeal the SB1 taxes, but we aren't allowed to lobby the public as to how to vote on that matter.
And to be respectful of time, we have a few final comments, and then I'll turn it over to Wayne for closing comments. But if you want to go ahead, Andy.
Well, I just want to say I completely agree that if you've got a choice between a VMT fee, for example, that doesn't do anything at all to incentivize fleet change and fuel change over time, compared to a gas tax, you've got to favor the gas tax as an institution, I would hope. And that's really the choice that's before us now. There is a lot of effort to put in to really tax basically the function of mobility as without regard to environmental impacts. And we would strongly urge the district to not go that way and to actually recognize that the function of mobility is a good thing. And in fact, you should try to weave that into this whole discussion about modernization.
Thanks. Rongsheng?
And just add one thing about SB1. Actually, in the repeal effort, not just to repeal SB1, also I think there's a suggestion or proposal to limit on future sales tax measure for transportation funding. So that's really critical. I think SCAG definitely on board to oppose the repeal. And in addition, I also had some comments on the funding option. In the incentive funding action plan, you do have a very exhaustive list, so I don't have anything else to add. But any of those funding sources do have pros and cons, as we just discussed. And I thought it's a good idea you did this survey on the sales tax measure. So I'm wondering whether maybe you also can do some survey to gauge support on some of the other, the long list. So, but you might want to pick a few you think is pretty good. I think the support is very important given the timing. If you look the money that's really needed is by 2023. We're only talking a few years away. So if you don't have support, you're not going to get the money that's needed, right? So I thought that may be a good approach to look into some other option, either being nationwide container fee or whatever you feel really can reach the level of funding that's needed. Doing some design, survey, reach out to whatever or whoever the stakeholder to see the chance of succeeding.
Okay.
Thanks, Rongsheng. I know from a timing perspective, we're near the end. So unless Philip says there's a few other things, I'll be ready to conclude.
No, I think that's
okay. So there's been a lot of good discussion here today. I thought there was a good exchange of ideas. I really appreciate what you were saying, Rongsheng, about the additional survey and sort of the concepts of how can we better communicate and coordinate. And the concept of partnership, I really appreciate, Marianne, you at least being willing to consider maybe combining something that we could actually draft up. I think that sort of talks about the challenge that we face, because I think, as was said earlier, people aren't aware of who the South Coast AQMD is, but they understand the importance of what we do from the perspective of, well, we know that there's somebody that makes clean school buses available, electric school buses. We know that there's somebody who provides grants to get cleaner heavy-duty trucks. And we like what they do, and they should do more of it, but we don't have any idea who they are. And I think we've got to do a much better job on the communication and outreach, and that's something that we need to do starting yesterday. So I'm going to ask staff to, get some information out, certainly to Marianne, to Paul, and to others, in terms of communication pieces that we can start help crafting the message, both in terms of the need, the challenge, and the timing. And as long as Barbara says that's okay, we're good with that. And then I think we have to always, think about how can we do a better job of coordinating. So, Bill, you talked about when you went back to DC with Barry in the past. I'm not aware of how that went and if you felt it was successful and if you accomplished anything. When you went back to DC, you said you went back to DC with Barry. I wasn't sure if you felt that was a successful effort or not. And if it wasn't, then what's that? Well, that doesn't mean that, that it was good for the district or not. But my point being is that Derek did talk about a DC trip that we're trying to do. We're trying to do it in a way that it's effective with regards to the timing in DC. We know that appropriations and budget is a big issue, and we want to make sure that we get back there in time, that the appropriators can consider what it is that we're asking of them as they move forward. We know that Congressman Calvert has been a great supporter of the district of clean air. And, if you have outreach with the congressman or other members, I would urge you to, can I say this, Barbara? Urge you to talk to your members. I can't ask you to lobby, but I can ask you to make sure that you talk with them and make sure that they're aware of the challenges that we face from a clean air perspective. I know they hear from us, but I think they would probably like to hear from all of you as well. So to the extent that you can do that, to the extent that, if we're in DC and people want to walk the halls with us or participate in meetings, I'm sure that's something that we would like to consider and see how we might be able to coordinate that. But I really do want to just thank you all for coming today, for sharing your ideas. There's going to be a lot more discussion, I would say, in the coming months. We hope to see a lot more action. I hope that we're able to report back to all of you on some of the successes that we're seeing from this communication and then from the actions that we're talking about. And to the extent that you're undertaking efforts and you want to let us know and see if there's ways that we can support those efforts, please feel free to contact Philip, Lisa, Derek, any of us really. We're all here. So thanks. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll see everybody soon.